Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us on whatever platform you're listening to us on, wherever in the world that you are listening to us on. I know we got listeners here in America, all the way to New Zealand, Netherlands, everywhere. It's great. And as always, thank you so much for spreading this podcast to others as we continue to grow our community. Now, today's topic is one that's really getting into some X's and O's, which I'm personally really excited about, looking to really talk about the defensive end specifically. And our topic for today, we're really going to be focusing in on matchup zones. So for those of you listening who really like getting into the X's and O's and talking about defensive schemes and schematics, this is going to be right up your alley. And I think you're going to enjoy it. And I'm probably going to learn a lot from it too. So this is going to be a really good episode to check out. So the guest that I have today is one who is very passionate about matchup zones and has also used the matchup zone to great success, which we will talk about here in a little bit. I'm very happy to be joined by Coach Josef Sigrist, who is here to talk about the matchup zone and a little bit more. Coach, how are you today?
Good, Coach. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. And like I said, I'm looking forward to learning just like my audience is. So this is exciting. So, Coach, let's go ahead and get started with your journey. Where's the game taking you? Where's coaching taking you? Just walk us through what that journey's been.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Northeast Ohio, graduated from Massillon Washington High School, which is a big football powerhouse in Northeast Ohio. But got my first teaching and coaching job actually in Rio Rico, Arizona, which I know you're familiar with out there in Tucson. Arizona. Yep, south of Tucson. And so I, never had been there, but varsity coach who had just won a state title at Rio Rico. They have a state championship in boys basketball. Needed an assistant coach who would eventually take over for him because he was becoming a principal. So I knew there was an opportunity to go and be his assistant and then take over a program that following year. That's kind of how he got me out from Northeast Ohio to Southern Arizona. And it was a great fit. John Fanning was his name, and he was such a tremendous mentor for me. I learned a ton from him. Everything I talk about today and all the success we've had at Valley High School is because I've been surrounded by phenomenal coaches that I played for and that I learned from as an assistant. So getting my start there in Arizona, I became a head boys coach way too soon, my second year of teaching and coaching. And I had to learn a lot on the fly. We had a great group of kids, but made it to the state tournament actually my first year. And then we're in rebuilding mode my second year. And actually I met my wife out there my first day on the job. And
oh, wow.
She's from Central Iowa. So that's where I am now. She wanted to move back to where her family was. And so 14 years ago, I go to the West Des Moines district and Valley. And I started as an 8th grade coach, boys coach, and then eventually became, an assistant varsity boys coach on our boys staff and under the direction of Jeff Horner, who played basketball at Iowa, and now is the head boys or men's coach at Truman State. So again, learning from tons of great coaches as an assistant. And then I'd never coached girls in my life prior to 9 years ago. And was fortunate enough to win that interview and get that job. And I think we've taken, the West Des Moines Valley Tigers to a whole new level as far as the girls program. Never had a state title until 2017, and then won one in 2017, and then won one in 2019 as well.
Awesome. And we're going to get into some of the ways that I know for you, the matchup zone was really important for those teams. And I'm just happy to hear you talk about being so happy making the transition from coaching to boys to girls. I know I kind of beat this over the head with some of the guests who I have who talk about how much they enjoy coaching girls basketball. And so I'm just very happy to have another guest who can kind of champion coaching girls basketball and how fun and enjoyable that can be. So on a
Yeah, I
personal
love
note,
it.
I'm pretty happy about that as well. So let's tie in the last part of what you said about the success that you've had, including some state championship success. And I wanted to ask you, what was the importance of matchup zones and those teams being successful? How much do you attribute the success of those teams to being able to run the matchup zone well in terms of like on the court success?
Great question, and it's layered. I
Sure.
mean, to win a state championship, you need phenomenal players and athletes. I mean, you can't do that. We've had Division I athletes, um, go to Marist University out in New York, Drake University here in Des Moines, and then also we have Zoe Young, who is our point guard on both of those teams, who's now at Maryland, who's a top 5-10 program in the nation. So you need amazing players first and foremost, and then my assistant coaches work their butts off as far as analytics, studying film, and the reason we use these matchup zones is we try to take away the other team's best players, and we play against Division I talent almost on a nightly basis. Ashley Jones is going to be a top pick in the WNBA. She's at Iowa State. They knocked us out of the 2018 state tournament.
Wow, yeah. That's
So,
serious.
I mean, and then Caitlin Clark, I mean, she's a freshman point guard at Iowa, and she's on the Naismith midseason list. So, and they're our high school rival. So, I mean, the conference is loaded with Division I talent. So we knew we had to try to take that away with our matchup zones, whether it's, strategize a double team, a diamond one where you front, a post player and then take away the backside with the bottom of the diamond. Or a diamond one where you take away the guard by face guarding it with one of your quick guards, trying to make others beat you rather than have, their Division I players go off for 30 or 40 points.
Sure.
So we use those analytics. We use film to make sure we are taking away the other team's best players.
And this kind of leads into kind of the next question for that I wanted to ask you in terms of the philosophy behind why you're particularly so passionate about that matchup zone. I know that there's so many defenses that you could run and so many different schemes. A lot of coaches like doing more traditional zones. There's a lot of coaches who just want to go play, straight up man to man and see what happens. I feel like you may have alluded to this just now in your previous answer, but why the matchup zone for you? Why is that something that like you're like, this is what we're going to do and this is what we need to do? I know you kind of talked about the level of competition that you play against, but is that kind of what led to the philosophy of continuing to do it year after year?
That's part of it. That's a great question. That's part of it, but the other part of it is the limited practice time. We don't have,
Sure.
Girls have developed so much with their AAU programs in the summer and spring, and they're playing tons of basketball. So they come more talented, but when you can start November 10th and your first game is 2 weeks later, you don't have, I'm a man-to-man guy first. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like to get up in your face, play aggressive man-to-man defense if you have those types of players. But if you don't, or if the other team is so talented in certain ways, you can use part man-to-man, part zone principles, and mesh those together with your personnel as a high school coach, and you're still teaching both sides of the game. You're still teaching fundamentals of man-to-man, but you're also taking away the blocks, taking away their high percentage layup shots. by, putting a triangle down there. So it's kind of a mix of, yeah, these teams are so talented. They have Division I talent. We have limited a time to put in all of our defenses. So we kind of just have fun and just play all kinds of different, pressure defenses, mixing up, different types of zone defenses.
Right, and you mentioned a couple of the things, whether putting in the diamond in one or some of these other different kinks that you kind of put in it. And I just wanted to ask this question just to be upfront, because I know a couple coaches listening might be curious about your thought process, and they might be in the same situation where they're thinking, we got limited practice time and certain things that we might not have enough time to get into. So, we're just going to put in, whatever that 2-3 zone is, or just that more traditional zone. For you, why is it important that it's a matchup zone and you can't just go like, the traditional like 2-3 or, some sort of 1-3-1? Why does it have to, for you, have to have that matchup component in it?
Yeah, another great question. I think even a lot of these AAU programs are getting used to just seeing 2-3 zones, the normal, they're used to attacking that. A lot of teams play either a man-to-man or a 2-3 zone is what teams practice against the most and become most comfortable. So a lot of our defensive philosophy is keep the offense that's so talented off balance. Throw different zones at them. Out of a timeout, we'll go from a diamond in one to a triangle in two. And if you can keep the other team off balance and shut down their best players, you've got a shot to throw them off and then get out in transition, which we love to get out in transition and play fast. So I think that's keeping the other team on their toes, keeping their coaching staff, wondering what type of are they guarding, this girl? Are they guarding two girls? Are they, what are they doing with the zone and the rest? So it's kind of a chess match,
Sure.
And we've just had a lot of success with it. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Sure. And I want to kind of walk through sort of the way that you teach it and implement it. But before I get into that, I'm curious, when your players, your younger players, like your freshmen, maybe who are just new to your program, what level of, I guess basketball IQ might be the best word, but what level of basketball knowledge do they have where they can just pick up, getting into a matchup zone versus you having to do a lot of the teaching and walking through? I'm trying to put myself in one of your players' shoes, trying to
Sure.
see what knowledge level they kind of come in with.
Yeah, it varies for sure. We're starting 3 freshmen right now who are, have Division I talent themselves. And so they come in very, very skilled, very knowledgeable on both the offensive and defensive side. We played man-to-man the other night, just went straight man-to-man because we saw weakness in guards. And we haven't worked on it a lot because our schedule is so tough, but we saw something in our guards just being able to turn them and pressure them. And we still work on that stuff fundamentally in practice, on a daily basis. So they just took it and ran with it. They're like, oh, this is fun too, So there's certain teams that we'll just get up and play man-to-man against. And I've had really good players. I mean, don't get me wrong. We don't win 2 state titles without really, really good players. So they know how to play it all. They know how to adjust. And the girls that I've coached are just so coachable. They want to take everything in, and I think they embrace learning something new, where we're meshing a zone that they might have used in the past, whether it be a 2-3 or a 1-3-1. We use that on occasion too, a 1-3-1. So, meshing the two man-to-man with zones works out pretty well for us.
So to add to that question, and again, I love that you not sort of, you do give credit to the skill and the talent, and the hard work that the players do, because that is so important. You know, if your players buy in and they work really hard and they put a lot of effort and time into their own game, it makes coaching a lot easier too, as well. That is for sure. So love that you give them credit. So if there's coaches who are listening out there who might be very comfortable with doing their 2-3 or whatever their traditional zone is, who might be looking to make that step to incorporating a matchup zone, and maybe, let's just say for the sake of this exercise, they have players who are able to pick it up and are able to kind of get what's going on. What are some things that coaches would have to be mindful of when stepping from a traditional zone into a matchup zone, in terms of like teaching points and how to make sure that that coach is teaching it in a way that the players are able to really get it?
Yeah, you got to make sure that your personnel fits whatever matchup zone you are implementing. So right now, for instance, we have a senior guard, Haley Chappell, who is a phenomenal defender. On the ball defender, she can look the other team's best player in the eyes and not give them any space. You know, she held a Division I point guard to 11 points in a state championship game as a sophomore. So your personnel needs to fit that system. If you're going to guard one girl or two players, man to man, because you have size or rim protectors in that, zone spot, which we had as well, then it's always based on our personnel first and foremost. And then teaching them, it's a challenge too, to teach them. My job is to look that person in the eye. And, my teammates, I have to trust my teammates to say when a screen is coming. They have to holler at me, or else coach is going to holler at them, So the trust factor is huge as far as communication on the floor. And then just, again, taking away the other team's best scoring possibilities. And if you do that, I just have seen that you can have a lot of success.
You mentioned, and we talked a couple of times here about the level of basketball IQ that your girls have. And I know a lot of coaches, including myself, we always preach the importance of communication and always feel that there's not enough communication going on. But I know that in a matchup zone, for that to work, there has to be talking, there has to be communication. You talked about screens a little bit earlier. Is that something that you've had to be very intentional about, like during practice or when you're, refining the matchup zone? Is there skills that your girls already come in with that you're just kind of fine tuning in terms of their communication? Can you walk us through just the communicating on defense aspect of it?
Yeah. So, if you're not communicating on the basketball floor, I don't care what defense you're playing, you're not going to be successful. So man to man, requires the most communication. I would say you've got to call out all these screens, and there are teams in our conference that are so well coached that they will screen you to death and re-screen you and, roll and pick and pop. And so, we actually lost our first state title game. We've been to 3 of them because the team was just so seasoned, and all we did with that team was play man to man. So I kind of learned my lesson that, if you're not just screaming out that screens are coming, then, you're going to struggle to face those top teams that set so many screens. So this allows you, these matchup zones allow you to have people in the middle that will communicate and limits the amount of screens that the offense can set. And when you do that against good man-to-man teams, their offense doesn't seem to click as well. And so, again, we still drill to our kids that this is how you defend someone when you're face guarding them. This is how you still play man-to-man defense. We still work on it. It's just not a huge part of our practice time. this year we've got to work a lot more on offense with our young kids, making sure there's continuity on our offensive side. So it still requires tons of teaching, but it's not as much drill work as, scouting another team's man-to-man offense.
Sure. And with that, are there like certain points of emphasis when it comes to communication? And we just talked about calling out screens, but in terms of what you see, in terms of the teams that you play against, or just to run your defense correctly, are there any other areas of that absolutely need to be like communicated, or everything kind of falls apart? I know it might seem kind of like a right there obvious question, but I want to get it all out in the open. I want to be openly with my communication as well.
So yeah, we start with our analytics and telling our kids that, shots in our girls' game come from driving layups, post-up layups, or kick-out threes, okay? So we have to take those away, whether it's, with a triangle and 2 or a 1-3-1 or diamond and 1, we've got to limit the other team's high percentage shots, on the blocks. So we're going to take away those block shots and force them to be really tough, shoot over us. And then as far as, manning up their top player, we're going to run them ragged. We just played a Division I talent a couple weeks ago and gave them their only loss. They're 8-1. And their coach is a legendary coach. He's won 650 plus games and 7 state titles. And we knew we had to take her away. And they were running her off screens on the baseline. And by the 3rd and 4th quarter, I think we wore her out. And she hit a couple shots in the first half that our girl was chasing her and from 26 feet, and just, she's a Division I shooter. I mean, that good. But by the second half, our zone really took its toll because we were racing that player all over the place. So make those players, shoot tougher shots, give them something that they don't see on a nightly basis. Their comfort is going to lead to them scoring. Okay. So we held a high 20s scorer to, I think it was 15 points, and 13 of them were in the first half. So 2 points in the second half. So I think that's what proves to us that these matchup zones do work. They might not work, right away in the first half, but if we can wear out that team, we've seen it really take over in the second half.
And I think that kind of speaks to the idea of, sticking with it and sticking to it, especially if it is something when you're trying to run somebody ragged. Like, you might not run them ragged the first half, but if you stick with it.
It's not easy.
No,
to stick with it all the time. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. And I know other coaches have talked about, trying to guard the best players and just throwing different bodies at them and just, being relentless to wear them out as best you can, especially if they're a shooter, if you can get their legs tired or just get them exhausted. Yeah, no, that 100% makes sense. Now, you also mentioned about drives and about that's obviously another way that players are going to score, driving into the middle, and obviously a matchup zone, any sort of zone that you run, the middle is always the part that a lot of coaches are most mindful of. So, what are you doing as a coach with your matchup zone to be cautious when you're playing against those teams that are drivers and they're looking to go middle and really trying to get to the rack?
Yeah, another great question. So in our man-to-man principles, we always try to force sideline baseline, try to keep it out of the middle, because middle drives will, you've all got to converge and help in there, and then, you overhelp and someone's wide open on the blocks. So we want to force all of that action, even in our zones, away from the middle, okay? And into that help. So we typically, whether it's a diamond and 1, we've got that top girl forced into one side, preferably the weak side, usually the left side, because a lot of teams are very right-hand dominant. So we'll have her sit on that that right shoulder and force left, and then close off that, left-hand drive. And if you do that, again, that takes away some comfort of the other team in starting their offensive progression, whatever that is. And I think that, leads me to another point, that these are hard to scheme against. And if teams are spending their time, they know that we're playing Valley, they'll throw, all these different zones at you. If they're spending their practice time working on that, I think we have an advantage there, because they're not used to facing that. Most teams practice against man-to-man or a 2-3 zone.
And really quickly to that point, just to emphasize that, and because a couple coaches have mentioned that, and I think you'll agree, is that if other teams are spending all that time kind of planning for what you're doing, that's also time they're not spending on what they do and working on that, which I think is a double advantage as well.
Right. Exactly. And I just think it keeps them on their toes. They're not used to maybe teaching, how to play against a matchup zone. So it might make their practices, disrupt them a little bit or throw them off. And if they don't work on it, then, they're going to struggle when they see it, because, some coaches might not like us for, oh, Sigrist is going to throw these junk zones at us, but we're still teaching the game. It's not like, we want to win state championships, and we're going to do everything we can to do that. And if I see a team has an edge, we're going to try to take away that edge.
Well, and you also, we're talking about matchup zones. If that's what you're running, I mean, there's so many man-to-man principles that still need to take place in that. Right. That is still defense. It might look a little different. There might be different. I've used the word schematics a couple times, the design of it and the layout, but it's still defense. It's still being man-to-man and running those principles. And you mentioned that in your ideal world, you'd be a man-to-man, and that's kind of the way that you like to have your defense. And obviously a matchup zone has man-to-man principles in it. Are there points of emphasis for you specifically on man-to-man defense when it's one-on-one guarding a offensive player? I know a lot of it is dependent on what the skill set of that player is, but are there some real points of emphasis that you want to hammer into your girls to make sure that they're playing their man or girl the right way?
Yeah, we always, again, want to force sideline baseline.
Yep.
If we're playing man and we're doing shell, we're forcing sideline baseline, keeping the ball out of the middle. We put a huge emphasis on help side. So if the ball's not on your side, you need to be 2 feet in the paint. And even we talk about straddling the rim on, looking at the rim on the other end and being that far over and help, and then trusting your closeouts. We still work a ton on two-handed closeouts. You'll see that our girls in our zones are going to close out with 2 hands. It's not just a one little hand or running at you. We work every day on 2-hand closeouts. So that's no different in teaching when we talk about man-to-man, because we emphasize the help so much that we need to race out and break down with 2 high hands on a closeout. So ball side pressure, on the line, up the line, those are all principles that we work on when we work on man-to-man.
And how important is, just in general, how important is footwork, and how important is, especially if like closeouts and, whether it's, the ball swings and you got to be able to quickly adjust to go from one side to the other. Do you have anything that you specifically pay attention to when it comes to like footwork on the defensive end? Or do your girls kind of just have a hang of it and kind of know what they need to do? What's that process sort of like?
Yeah, it was a rough, a lot of times we'll do ladders and things to work on our, lateral quickness in the preseason. Our preseason was really shut down this year, and I know you guys are suffering with that too. That it's just 2020 was just such a unique year. We didn't start practice with a very young team until December 22nd. So we've still only had about 14 practices to date, and we've had 7 games. So the practicing and all that preseason type footwork has been the biggest challenge for us with a young team. But Yes, footwork is huge, whether you're talking about slides side to side. We do that one-on-one turns, talking about getting low, exploding with the hips, all that kind of stuff that we like to take advantage of, in a preseason type conditioning program and utilize our awesome weight room at Valley High School. We have a tremendous weight room. And girls in the last couple of years can get in that weight training class that they work on some of that speed and agility. So all very important things that, to be a really good athlete and to be a very good defender, whether it's man or zone, you need to be quick on your feet and play low to win the game. So,
and it kind of leads into that follow-up question you talked about, not having the preseason time, and there's been certain, gaps that have probably formed because you haven't been able to shore those up during the preseason. So when it comes to footwork specifically on the defensive end, what are some things that you've noticed even in this current season that you've seen from your players where you notice it on the court, where in your mind you're thinking, oh, if I had a preseason with them, I know that they would not be doing this right now? What sort of gaps have you kind of noticed that coaches might want to notice themselves if they want to kind of shore up the footwork of their players?
Yeah, our first few games, we fouled a lot, just being a step late to either, a passing lane or we're chasing too much or we're reaching from behind. So those practice reps really can eliminate bad fouls that I think we've had a few against the good teams, and we play number 1 tomorrow night. So it's not going to get any easier, but we're going to have to work on getting into better positions, whether it's in man or it's in our zones. Beat the girl to a spot. We talk about that a lot. And I think in the first couple of weeks, we're a lot more reactionary, rather than anticipatory. We want to be good anticipators, and that comes with more practice time. That comes with reps, that we just have not had. So we're seeing some of those cheap fouls because of being a little more reactionary.
And I think that's something just good to be mindful of for coaches in general, is if they see that on their team, whether it's, like cheap fouls or, just like poor closeouts or, ineffective closeouts. So that stuff might just be footwork stuff. It might be a case where the players kind of know what they're supposed to do and could mentally articulate it to you, but just their footwork or their foot speed or whatever, their agility, just their lateral quickness might not be there. And those might be things that you need to, yeah. Like you said, they need the reps.
Working on it. Yeah. I've seen strides with our kids. I mean, we start 3 freshmen, like I said, and then our sophomore class is a lot of our depth on our bench. And we had a great practice tonight. I'm seeing strides each and every night with how hard we go. Just because we play matchup zones doesn't mean we don't go hard in practice. And if our, JV team makes a shot, we're sprinting to the other end and trying to get a layup. So, we don't just work on this defensive stuff. We work on transition a ton.
And thank you very much for segueing to a question I was going to ask you about that, because I think that is a misconception or something that coaches kind of have a little bit of apprehension about when they hear the word zone. When they, I know that the word zone can have a connotation where it's very like reactionary and you're kind of setting up your wall and, letting the other team kind of do like what they want to do, and your zone kind of holds up against it. But you just brought up the point about how you want to get after it and you want to be aggressive and you really want to take it to the other team. So can you kind of dispel maybe some of the misconceptions that might exist about a matchup zone with it, just kind of being there, and how it can be a really aggressive and kind of taking control of the game type defense?
Yeah, I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but zone just kind of for the old school coaches has kind of a negative kind of tone to it. If I wasn't taught, and we didn't play tons of zone when I was in school either, but if I wasn't taught it, then, man to man is the only way to go for some coaches. And, but that's not true. I mean, I think if you're here to truly win games and win championships, which, it's not the only side of coaching, but, I love to win. And so if you can take away, again, those best high percentage shots and those best players, then your zone is effective. Mm-hmm. And if your zone is effective, it allows you to do a lot of really fun things transition wise and on the offensive end. So our defense still is the foundation that leads to our offense. And we are one of the most defensively efficient teams in our conference, and it's the best conference in Iowa. I mean, it's the biggest school division, and we've got 5 of the top 10 teams in the state in our 6-team conference. So, again, if we just, relied on straight man-to-man every night, teams are too good. They're too good of players that will expose whatever weakness you might have. So we use it as an advantage for us and then get out and run the other way.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes with any sort of, whether it's defense or even in some cases, depending on an offense that you run, that if you only rely on one certain thing, it's going to become easier to scout and become easier to plan for. And then if there's no counter to it, if there's nothing else for you to switch to, then might be in trouble. So that's kind of, I think, kind of the beauty sort of it in a matchup zone. And you talked about it, I can let you explain a little further if you want, is that there's a lot of small tinkering that you can do with the way that it looks. And then to another team, it could look like something completely different when all you've really done is just make like 1 or 2 little adjustments. Is that right? I feel like you kind of alluded to that, but I wanted you to speak on that yourself.
Well, I mean, you would know, just like any good coach. I mean, if you're not making adjustments as a coach, unless you're the best team with the best athletes at each and every year, you better be making adjustments as a coach based on your personnel, the other team's personnel. You're going to have to make adjustments in game. We make adjustments in game all the time. And I think our ability to change these zones in practice and keep our girls on their toes in practice makes them better equipped for making those changes during a game.
So let me, before I forget to ask you that, what does that look like in practice when you're kind of making those transitions from one maybe zone look to another? How does the practice kind of run to get them ready for it when it comes like game speed?
Right. We typically don't change a defense without a stop in action, or we can do it during a free throws, timeouts. So we work on that in practice, whether it's a free throw, we're going to switch up our zone right here. Okay. Everybody watching me, and, everybody's talking about where their spots are. So communication is at its height, and and then if a team calls a timeout, that's when I like to switch up, our zones, or throw a possession of man-to-man at them. Because usually if another team's calling a timeout, they're calling a timeout to strategize against something that they've seen to try to gain their edge, their adjustments. So we're going to counter that with our adjustments. And by practicing that each and every day, our players are ready to make those adjustments more on the fly.
And it almost seems obvious, but I know sometimes I personally can forget to do this when I'm coaching, is that just to make that transition in a game so much easier for your players, just run it in practice and do it in practice to where it's not a big deal for them because they're used to doing it so many times. I know for me personally, I've had this before where maybe I don't see something that I like in a particular defense that we're running, and I end up spending like way too much time on that particular thing, trying to refine 1 or 2 details, when the time probably could have been used to just transition into something else and just sort of get into the flow of switching in and out to different defenses. But I think all coaches maybe go through that, where they end up, going, spending too much time on one particular thing, and next thing you know, way too much of their practice has gone by.
That's a good point, Coach. Our practices are charted out in 5, 10, 15, no more than 20-minute segments. And we put it on the clock, we stick to that, you know?
Yeah.
I rarely put an extra minute. There's times where I put an extra minute on the clock if I know we need to work on something specifically. But we know we need to move on. We need to move to, and practice is a huge part of your success. You know, how prepared we are as coaches to work on all the aspects of the game. You know, if I spend more than 20 to 25 minutes on these matchup zones, I'm not spending enough time on our offensive side or our out of bounds plays. So yeah, you can fall into that trap where you're just working on one thing and you're not developing the whole player and the whole team.
Yeah. And I think that it's really important for coaches either to chart those out, or I know, you know, coaches who've, you know, used like the shot clock or use the game clock in their gym and sort of, you know, set the timer and then just, you know, they got to let it go. And I think there's something to be said for, at a certain point, there's only so far you're going to get on a particular drill or running something, that spending more time on it actually is detrimental. And you need to just do something else, and maybe you can go back to it later, but
come back to it. Yeah, that's a good idea. Right.
But just, you might just want to let it go. And if only for the fact that, have them do something that like they're already doing well or can be successful at, and just let them be successful at something. And then maybe you can bring them back to something that's a little bit more challenging, but it's kind of different philosophies for sure. So you brought this up earlier that other teams know, like, we're playing Valley, so I know we're playing up against this matchup zone that this coach is going to throw against us. So since you've been running it so many years, what do other teams do to try and break through and see success against you? What would a coach who may be starting to implement the matchup zone, what might they notice the other team try and do to try and bust it up?
Well, they're going to try to take advantage of the spots in the zone that are vacated, you know. A lot of times that might be the corner. So we're forcing them into corner threes, you know. And so a coach's adjustment might be, okay, guys, you're going to get a lot of corner threes against Valley. We're going to work on, you know, getting the passes there, ball fakes, and getting a lot of corner threes, and then those reps with shooting them. So I think, you know, as far as either penetrating the zone and those gaps, or finding the spots where we might allow more shots to be made, that would be how I would attack it. And then I always try to unbalance, you know, if there's a one guard front, I like to have two guards up top, you know, on offense, or two guard front, I like a one guard and the normal two wings. And we do pretty basic things that allow us to unbalance another team's zone. So those are the things that I would work on, you know, against us. I try not to give away all our secrets. I'm happy to help all coaches if they want to use those.
And just to maybe go back, when maybe you were first putting in the matchup zone, or when you first were, you know, kind of working through and ironing it out, some of the things with it, did you have some things in games where like your mind was blown, or like something like, oh, like this is what they were going to try and do, and I never thought that a team was going to do this, or I didn't know that my team potentially had this weakness, we got to make sure that we shore this up? What were some sort of the learning curves or the bumps that you kind of had along the way as you were trying to smooth out your matchup zone?
Yeah, there are teams that are a lot more successful against it, and then that makes us switch our type up, you know, more often. And that's what we challenged our, you know, with number one coming into town tomorrow to Valley. We know they're going to challenge it, you know, as good as anybody. So we put our girls in that situation in practice the last 2 nights. Say, hey, they're going to do a really good job of spacing out their players so that they can attack it with a Division I post going to the University of Iowa. I mean, so we know they're going to challenge us. We know, and that's why we worked on 5 different defenses tonight. So, yeah, we've got to be willing and ready to make adjustments to where they're getting their shots from. But we think we have a counter to wherever that might be. And that's why we work on the different types of zones.
And this is more of a philosophical question. This is one that's really hard to, I think sometimes gauge as a coach. It's maybe sort of like a heat of the moment type thing. But when you're coaching, we talked about in-game adjustments, specifically on the defensive end, since that's our focus. How do you as a coach determine if you need to stick the course with a particular defense that you're running versus, okay, like this isn't working, we got to switch something up? How do you kind of determine whether it's, oh, they just got that shot up, or, I think this is still the right play to keep this particular defense, versus like, okay, like this isn't going to work the way we need it to, we got to switch into something else?
Yeah, it's their comfort level. It's the ease of, or the difficulty of how they're getting those shots. If they're getting great ball movement, kicking it opposite and getting wide open looks and knocking them down, we know that's not the right defense at that time, But if they're contested shots, if we're running that Division I girl ragged by Face Gardner and we're doing a great job on the others, and she still makes a shot, she made 2 of them from 26 feet, hey, tip your cap to them and say, we're doing okay, it's going to take over. And that's when it did in the second half. She didn't have the legs that she had in the first half. So it's the ease at which they're getting their shots off, or hopefully the difficulty at which they're getting their shots off.
And I definitely know that some of that, for sure, you can just sort of eyeball that and be able to assess that. But also, I'm not sure, so I want to ask specifically the level of scouting that you do and how much preparation of film that you do by looking at other teams. I also know that could be a situation where if you see that the team you're playing is able to do the same things against you that you saw that they were successful with on film, then that's obviously another indicator that things might need to be switched up. But let me ask you specifically about your scouting and your preparation. How much time goes into preparing for the opponent that you're going to play? I guess it's a really good question considering the game that you have coming up soon.
Yeah, and like I said, we go from a Tuesday game to a Friday game. So luckily we had, 2 days to prepare for this opponent. Whereas we turn around and play Saturday morning, or not Saturday morning, but Saturday at 3 after. So we play number 1 and number 8 this week, and we're number 12 right now. So, it's going to be a really tough weekend for us. So coaches and my assistant coaches are awesome too. I need to give them credit where they deserve it, because they help me a ton with scouting. My assistant, Coach Wiederbrand, is phenomenal. My other assistant is a legendary coach with about 700 wins and 2 state titles himself. So as far as all that's concerned, and then I have former player coaching for me, so they work their tails off too, to get scouting reports, find out where these teams are making their shots, because our film system, I don't know if you're familiar with Huddle.
Yep,
but
that's what we use.
We use Huddle and send it off to Assist, and it'll tell us where all these, teams are making their shots. And so we dive into that. Sometimes we have a day, sometimes we have 2 days, sometimes we have 12 hours to prepare, and then we just have to communicate with our kids, hey, this is where they're getting their shots from. We're going to take this away today. All right. You need to force them left. They get 90% of their shots on the right-hand side. So we're really going to emphasize taking away and matching up on this right side. So use the analytics a ton, use our scouting a ton, and my assistant coaches do a phenomenal job helping me with that.
And I think can't give quality assistant coaches enough credit. That is for sure.
No.
To have ones that can do that sort of thing and help you get prepared and everything. Like, phew, not enough good words can be said about coaches who can help you in that way. And when it comes to all of that information, I know I've had a couple episodes even dedicated to this, but just to kind of touch on that, how much of that information that you learned from the scouting report, how much of that needs to be communicated with your players versus just sort of balancing the fact that you trust them, that their defensive principles are good enough that they don't have to worry a ton about what the other team is doing? How do you kind of balance, just giving your players the right amount of information without making them feel that they got to like reinvent the wheel on defense?
Yeah, we knew we couldn't focus on, number 8, which presents different, problems to us on Saturday. We needed to focus solely on Johnston tonight, but you can sneak some other things in with drills, say, hey, we need to work on this for all opponents. And so we did that tonight with some things that we would see on Saturday. And then we'll bring the kids in about an hour earlier since there's no time, and we'll have some film broken down of the team on Saturday. So it's going to be a lot more of the mental and cerebral type of study for that Saturday game with no practice time per se to work on that opponent. So
Sure.
It varies with each opponent and how much time you have to prepare.
Yeah, and I think that as coaches, I've said this a couple of times, we have to be the ones who have all of this information and know all of this information, but part of our job is to be smart enough and be a good enough communicator that we can take all that information and just get that film, get the most important bits of film, or communicate like the most important parts to our players. They can just focus on playing. At least that's for me personally, but that's how I
agree.
kind of go.
100%.
Last little part, philosophically, talking about running just a matchup zone or really any zone. Big concern a lot of coaches always have is rebounding, and it can get crazy, especially in zones. And I know communication's a huge part of that. So, what's rebounding look like? What have you done to try and still have an effective rebounding team that can get out in transition?
Yeah, we work on Tom Izzo philosophy of hit, find, get. I mean, you need to find your defender and go and make contact. So shot goes up, you should be looking for a body, whether you're in man or zone, and not just going to the rim and getting sucked under. So you've got to work a lot on that. We work a lot on getting to a good spot, surrounding that painted area, and making contact before we go get a rebound. And we have times where the ball's not coming off where we need it to, and it's a struggle, but we've rebounded pretty well. We wouldn't be able to run these zones if we weren't rebounding well, and other teams were getting 2-3 shots that led to points. So, but they're really not.
Were there things you had to teach of your players about those rebounding principles? Did they know about, find, hit, get? Did you have to like tell them, hey, you better find someone, you better hit them before you get the ball? How much, I guess, refinement was needed for their rebounding to get where you wanted it to be?
When they come in, it's a learning curve for them for sure.
I think rebounding really is that way a lot.
Yeah, rebounding is it's tough. It's a will and a want to,
Sure.
The person that wants a rebound is going to get a lot of rebounds. So it's a lot about effort, and we're always about effort and doing as much as you can, working hard. Our kids work really, really hard in everything they do. So I think if you have that, you're halfway to a rebound. If you have that 100%, I'm going to give effort. I send 4 to the glass on an offensive rebound and 5 to the glass on the defensive rebound. And if they're not, we tell them at practice. And sometimes there's running on the line. If you're watching and not crashing, you're not doing the right thing. So again, it's stuff that we work on a daily basis.
And then my last question with that, really curious because of the league that you play in and how competitive it is. I know we've talked primarily about things running in the half court defense, but how much press are you running? How much are you getting up full court on defense? How do you kind of balance that, especially with the league that you're in?
Yeah, it just depends on the opponent. We'll pick some teams up man to man. We'll extend a 1-3-1 sometimes and trap right after half court and in the corners. Since they only have 10 seconds, I try to make everything 75 percent of the court or more. There's other teams that we'll get up and pressure 100 because our guards and our athletes are better, but for others, I've mixed in a diamond press, 2-2-1 at times. So but with this group, we have a lot more size than I've ever had here at Valley for 9 years. And so we utilize that size and put them, hands up in space in the half court to make steals and do a lot of good things that way. And then we race the other way.
Yeah, always nice to be able to get that in the half court and then get that rebound or get that steal and just get up and going and then go right into transition for sure. Awesome. So Coach, to wrap up, I give every guest a couple questions. This first one, what is a coaching moment from your coaching career that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
Just, when I came in, it was all about, what are my X's and O's going to be? What are we going to do to win ball games? And I learned prior to taking the girls' job, but even more every year in my 9 years at Valley, it's all about relationships first. You need to have just a quality relationship with each and every one of your players. Show them that you care and that you love them, and they'll be willing to do anything for you. And that's what we've found out, that our girls will do anything we want them and ask them to do because they know the coaches care about them. And so relationships are what everything is built on, and that's no different with coaching.
I'm glad you mentioned that because this is such a X's and O's sort of conversation that we're having. So I'm glad that you did bring up the fact, relationships and the buy-in, especially because, as a coach, any good coach cares about their players more as people and their development as people more than necessarily where they're going to go as basketball players. So yeah, the relationship part, absolutely. I think that, and I've said this to teachers, especially collegiate or teachers who are in college looking to teach. I've told them that, there's a big difference between liking your subject versus liking to teach kids your subject. I think it's kind of the same way with basketball, right? Where like we can love basketball and love the game, but we have to love the people that we coach as well. And it sounds like that's something that's really important for you as well.
For sure.
Okay. And then lastly, Coach, this is what I tell every guest. It's called my 60-second soapbox, where they get to get out any concluding thought, final message, or last idea that they kind of want to leave the listeners with. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor, Coach, to take it away. If it goes over 60 seconds, that's okay too. But go ahead, Coach, take it away.
Well, I thank you for having me, and I think we are in such a rewarding profession, and you may not see it each and every day, but you will when you look back on the impact you've had on kids' lives and the players that reach back out to you and that you stay in contact with, that are either in college or off, having families, and you go to their weddings. And I mean, it's just, it's such an impactful, rewarding profession that, not every day is rosy and perfect or anything, but
Sure.
that's part of what it's all about. And I don't know what else I would be doing, honestly. I think about the money you could make doing a lot of other things, but when it gets down to it, that's not what life is about. Life is about the impact you make on people's lives. And I hope that, when I look back on my career, that I still have those relationships with those kids and know that they know that I cared about them and learned something in our program that helped them be a better individual and a better person for their family. And if we did that, no matter the wins or losses, then it was all worth it.
Awesome. Really, really well said. Couldn't even add anything more to that. That was great. Coach, I want to thank you for spending some time talking about, the matchup zone, talking about defense, talking about some more topics that we got into. It was a great conversation, and I learned a lot. And I think I'm also, in a way, grateful that I'm not in the same conference that you are sometimes, because boy, you have your work cut out for you. So good luck going forward. Definitely good luck tomorrow, and hopefully the season goes well and you're able to finish everything the way you need it to be. So Coach Sigrist, thanks for spending some time talking to us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Coach, and best of luck to you. And I hope you guys get back on the floor as soon as possible, because I can tell you're passionate about the game and want to be out there coaching your kids too. So thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot. And hopefully this time next year, nobody across the country is worrying about any of this, and we're all just playing basketball as normal. As well as all of you listening. Hopefully all of you listening get to play basketball and coach basketball as normal as well. Thank you all for listening. This was another edition.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.